So far, most of the movies that I've covered on this channel have been wacky, goofy, so bad that they're good type movies. But today I thought I'd shift gears and talk a little bit about one of my actual favorite horror movies. Granted, it does have its goofy moments, and its surreal, occasionally difficult to follow structure means it's not for everyone. But to me, that's all outshined by the intriguing atmosphere created in this film, as well as just the sheer brutality of it. And you know what? I actually hated this movie the first time I saw it. So today, let's take a look at perhaps Fulci's greatest film, The Beyond. This video is sponsored by Shudder. If you like horror movies, Shudder is basically the Netflix of horror. And if you like this video, you can watch not just The Beyond, but a lot of Fulci's greatest films, including some of my other favorites, City of the Living Dead and House by the Cemetery. This month, Shudder is celebrating halfway to Halloween with its biggest month of programming ever, including a brand new season of Shudder original series Creepshow, the return of The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs, the third entry to the Train to Busan trilogy, Train to Busan Presents Peninsula, and much more. And if you want to go deeper, Shudder has a massive selection of horror movies from around the world, from classics to modern favorites with a huge range of subgenres. Get started streaming the best horror, thriller, and supernatural content. Shudder's expertly curated collection includes must-see titles like Color Out of Space, Host, the Mortuary collections, plus all the best horror documentaries in the hit Creepshow TV series from executive producer Greg Nicotero of The Walking Dead. To try Shudder free for 30 days and to take advantage of Shudder's biggest content month ever, just go to shudder.com and use code WANG. The Beyond is a movie about a woman who inherits a hotel. Then it turns on that the hotel is built on a gate to hell. And since it's built on a gate to hell, all kinds of crazy shit happens. Sounds like I'm being kinda goofy here, but really in a lot of ways it's as good a description as any. And that's a good thing. But before I get too deep into it, I think it's actually kind of an interesting story how I came to know about this movie, and that story kind of reveals some of the quirks of the movie's history. My journey with it, as with many great stories from this period of time, begins with the band Pantera. My later high school years, Pantera was one of my absolute favorite bands, and I had a friend who had Pantera's VHS tapes, and I'd go watch them at his place. Then one day he puts on this DVD. And he's like, hey, this is another band that Phil Anselmo, Pantera's vocalist, is in. Although he is under a pseudonym.
The thundering Armageddon of Anton Crowley.
So this death metal band, Necrophagia, forms in 1983. One of the first death metal bands, very into gore and horror movies. They break up in 1987, and in the interim, the band's vocalist Killjoy becomes friends with Phil Anselmo. Then in 1997, after a 10-year hiatus, now with Phil Anselmo, himself also a huge horror movie fan, under the name Anton Crowley, and he's playing guitar, and this DVD happens. A collection of music videos punctuated by scenes of the band talking about how much they like horror movies.
We fucking watch horror movies all day long. We never watch TV. He watches boxing. I don't watch shit on TV.
The last video in this collection is the song And You Will Live in Terror, named after the full title of The Beyond, E Tu vivrai nel terrore. L'Aldila. It combines performance footage of the band cut with some brutal scenes from The Beyond. At the time, I have no idea what this movie is, and I have to find out. So I asked my friend and he's like, oh man, this is the most fucked up horror movie ever made. It's called 7 Doors of Death. So I go and get 7 Doors of Death, watch it with some friends and we're all in agreement. This movie fucking sucks. What I didn't know at the time was that 7 Doors of Death was actually a highly edited version of The Beyond. The name was changed allegedly because they thought The Beyond was too vague of a name for an audience to buy into it. This version severely toned down a number of the ultra-violent death scenes that this movie was known for, and in some ways also made this already somewhat difficult to follow movie even less coherent. And on top of that, they also completely replaced the original soundtrack, which was made by Fabio Frizzi, who, if you watched my Italian Godzilla video, you'll know is one of my favorite film composers. And this soundtrack is by far one of his best works. I was even lucky enough to see him perform the soundtrack to this movie along to the movie itself with his band live. That being said, there are those who consider the 7 Doors of Death soundtrack to be the superior soundtrack. And it's a good soundtrack, don't get me wrong, but it might be a case of just you prefer whichever one you're more used to. So The Beyond is originally released in 1981. It doesn't make it to the United States until 1983, and it's only available as the Seven Doors of Death version for a very long time. Then in 1996, the company Grindhouse Releasing is founded by Bob Murawski and Sage Stallone, Sylvester Stallone's son who we remember from Rocky V. Very quickly after founding the company, they fly to Italy to meet with Fulci to discuss bringing this film in its proper form to the US. Unfortunately, Fulci passes away not long after they make their trip, but they manage to make a deal with his daughter to remaster the uncut version of the film and bring it to the United States. When the release is ready to go, they get together with Quentin Tarantino, who cites Fulci as one of his favorite directors, and have a theatrical rollout in 1998 of finally, for the first time in all its glory, not Seven Doors of Death, but The Beyond. Now, by the time I had watched Seven Doors of Death, this version was already around, but at the time I just didn't know about it. And when someone tried to convince me that, oh, you just had seen a bad edit of the film, give it another chance, I was kinda skeptical. But eventually I was roped into it, and it wound up becoming one of my favorites of all time. To this day even, I question whether my initial opinion of the movie was because of the edit, or if when watching the Seven Doors version for the first time, and I hate to describe it like this because it sounds so fucking pretentious, but I wonder if it's just that I didn't get it at first. Because even when watching the proper edit, it's kinda hard to follow. The way some of these scenes jump from one thing to the next, it's very surreal and almost dreamlike. And this aspect of the film has been criticized as some of making it just a way for Fulci to kind of sew together a bunch of super gory set pieces. A theory further supported by the fact that the film didn't actually have a shooting script, or just a 3-page long treatment. Dialogue and even sometimes entire sequences were just made up on the spot. I know this all sounds like the ingredients for an absolutely terrible horror movie, but I think it makes it better. The loose ways and everything is connected, the awkward conversations and pauses that are just a little too long. It enhances the discomfort and this overall feeling that everything that's happening in this movie is being guided by the hand of some demonic force that's just out of everyone else's sight. A psychological layer on top of what would otherwise be just an outright gorefest. Anyway, speaking of gorefest, let's get to these kills. Louisiana, 1927. A pointy-cheeked painter named Schweik is laying down some creepy paint strokes in a hotel, and an angry mob is coming for him like he drew anime titties too big on Twitter. The mob confronts him and, damn, that's a deep-ass cut. As they continue to beat him, they say it's his fault that this hotel and this town will be cursed forever. He warns them that this hotel is one of 7 doors of evil, and he's the only one who can save them. That by killing him, they will doom them all. And this argument is supported by a book being read by a blonde woman in another room called the Avon. Not Avon, Avon. But the angry mob does not care. They whip him some more, crucify him the right way, through the wrists and not the hands. They melt his face with acid, and it's time to get this dance party started. I hope you like funky music played over extremely long gore sequences, because there's gonna be a lot of them. Now we're in the present day, 1981. A woman named Liza has now inherited the hotel that's built over the gate to hell and having some renovations done, planned by an architect named Martin. Larry the house painter sees some creepy blind eyes staring at him through the window and has himself a tumble. Seriously, if Fulci just have something against painters? Blood pours out of every hole in his face as he rants about the eyes, while a very sweaty man watches. And finally, Dr. John McCabe rolls up, looking like the guitarist for a Breaking Benjamin cover band. After squishing his eyes around a bit, he comes to a conclusion that only a doctor can determine.
This man needs to get to a hospital.
But make no mistake, this guy is done for. There's a flood in the basement, so Joe the plumber shows up. Not to be confused with Joe the plumber, the Obama-era plumber turned pundit, who for some reason is named Samuel, but we call him Joe. I like to imagine he named himself this just because he loved this movie so much.
You the plumber?
Hi.
Joe, right?
Yes, ma'am. What's the trouble?
Alright, come on, this guy does not talk like that. He'd definitely be like, hey yo, I'm here to fix the toilet. Joe finds that the leak is coming from a flimsy brick wall, and on the other side, crucified acid man from the 20s. back to life and ripping Joe's eyes out with his bare hands. Liza discovers a blind woman named Emily standing in the middle of a bridge with a dog named Dickie. Emily knows that the hotel is bad, but she won't say why. Meanwhile, the housekeeper Martha seems unfazed after discovering Joe's eyeless, gurgling body that's in the middle of vomiting some mix of blood and pus. But then all of a sudden, the acid-faced zombie from the 20s floats to the top of the water, apparently taking a nap because killing Joe took a lot out of him. That gave her a bit more of a shock. But she's still okay, and the bodies get sent to be examined by emo Hulk Hogan, who for some reason hooks Shrike up to a brainwave monitor. I don't know why he would do that, it was nothing of course, until wait, he turns around and Shrike pulls a Michigan J frog. Also, you can see him blinking, but I don't think that was on purpose. I feel like blinking is such a dainty gesture that it almost takes away from your crazy acid-faced zombie credibility to be caught blinking. You can't be taken seriously as a super strong Hellgate zombie if you're blinking, so it was probably a goof. Joe the plumber's wife, with their daughter Jill in tow, goes to look at his dead eyeless body and prepare it for his funeral. It's a lovely suit, but she won't get to see it in action. You see, for some reason, there's a giant jar of acid just sitting on top of a shelf, and there's no lid on it. She screams as she notices said jar slowly start to fall over in the distance, and then in ways that were never exactly shown. She somehow winds up on the floor directly underneath the acid, and it goes on her face, and her face gets melted. In 1981 Louisiana, jar comes on you. Jill watches in horror as her mother's face melts, and the mix of acid, blood, and what used to be skin spreads out on the floor. Those are some nice ass shoes though, so she's not trying to get that messed up. And then the Fabio Frizzi soundtrack gets funky again. You know, the world would just be a much better place if we had more funky bass lines in horror movie soundtracks. She opens the door to escape, but it's a closet full of zombies. Make no mistake though, this is not the last we've seen of her. Martin the architect goes to the town library to find the hotel's original blueprints, at which point he discovers that there's a whole secret part of the hotel, but he's not going to be able to come back with his useful knowledge because there's a bolt of lightning and he gets scared, so he falls off the ladder, bouncing his head off the floor, seemingly paralyzing him, which makes him the perfect target for a swarm of spooky spiders making togepi noises. The bass guitar comes back, and you know what that means. It's time for the tarantulas to eat him alive, as he can only watch on in horror. That is, until they eat his eyes.
Well, actually, it's impossible for a tarantula to eat a human.
Martha unclogs a poopy bathtub, and in that tub, Zombie Joe the plumber. And though I didn't edit that sound in, he just for some reason makes a fart sounding growl there. Or maybe it's because he's a plumber. Joe, being the hard-working blue-collar man, took a suit jacket off because he knows there's work to do. And he uses that strong blue-collar muscle to impale Martha's eye through the back of her head on a spike, kind of like a reverse Zombie 2. Are you sensing a theme here yet? The doctor, Avon in hand, takes another look at Schweik's corpse. At the same time, Schweik is also with Emily and Dickie in her home.
Schweik, I know you're here!
Come on man, she's blind, it's not cool. Schweik has a posse, the zombies of everyone else who died, including the sweaty guy, Arthur, who we never actually see die. I'm not sure if I should count him as a kill or not. I mean, earlier on there's a scene where we see him trying to patch up that wall, and that's the last we see of him, so we can assume he died there. But in that time, he could have just as well also died from choking on a banana peel or some shit. Welcome to Oops All Kills, where everything is made up and the points don't matter. This posse has come to bring Emily back to hell where she came from, but Dickie fights off the zombies. The zombies who are strangely adverse to being bitten by a dog.
Attack, Dickie! Attack!
I love how she screams for Dickie. Good dog. Bad dog. Yeah, I know, Suspiria did it first. But in this one, he rips her ear off too. Eliza goes to investigate the hotel basement again, where she's attacked by Arthur, who is now in the basement after just being in Emily's home. She manages to escape when the doctor finds her and lets her know that he has it all figured out.
This hotel is one of the 7 gateways of hell.
Hell's ears were burning, triggering a Resident Evil-like escape sequence.
The triggering system has now been activated.
It's the Zombies Hotel now. They seek sanctuary at the hospital,
I'm gonna call the FBI.
where he can call the FBI and I guess tell them that there's the gates of hell that have opened underneath this hotel and now it's full of zombies. Unfortunately, the phone doesn't work. Yep, the hospital is also full of zombies. As the doctor proceeds to waste all of his ammo, Liza discovers Jill hiding in a room full of not yet animated zombies in body bags. Meanwhile, the doctor finds his buddy, Emo Hulk Hogan, who does not survive long as a strong gust of wind blows pieces of broken glass right into his face. Doc reunites with Liza, who now has a scared Jill with her. But then, the one and only zombie Shrike pops up. Now, from what we've seen in this movie, we can determine that this is one of those zombie films where a headshot means the zombie is dead. At the same time, it's also been established that Shrike is kinda like a super zombie. He has some kind of powers that make him above the other zombies. You have to wonder, would he get taken out by a mere headshot? We don't find out because the doctor shoots him in the chest 3 times and it does nothing. You know who does get hit with a headshot though? Probably the most iconic death special effect in this movie. What's gotten into you, you crazy kid? Oh, don't have a head no more. Doc and Liza escape from the hospital zombies down a staircase, where they find themselves in the hotel basement. After traveling through that fake wall one more time, they find themselves wandering the place that Shrike had been painting at the beginning of the movie. They try to turn back, but the hotel is gone. They see the same thing wherever they look until they too become blind. And that's the end of the movie. Probably one of my favorite movie endings of all time. I even had that last shot as my Twitter cover photo until I replaced it with a picture of Ricky Berwick. Even watching it the way that I watched it to write this video, taking pauses and going back and forth and writing, watching that ending again still gave me chills. Like the way I hyped this movie up in the beginning, I was like, watch me watch this again and be like, actually that ending's kind of... But no, I still love this movie. The way it manages to combine so many different types of horror movies, the gore, the zombies, and this Lovecraftian element that takes something that would otherwise be a simple splatterfest and make it something that sticks with you long after you've seen it. Definitely a movie that I highly recommend, and as I kind of warned at the beginning of the video, if you wind up not liking it, I recommend coming back to it again in a few months, maybe even a year or so. It might just be a movie you gotta watch at least twice. And if you do like it, you also gotta watch the other Fulci Gates of Hell movies, that being City of the Living Dead and House by the Cemetery. Of this informal, thematically linked trilogy, I think The Beyond is the best one, but they're all really good movies. But anyway, that's all for now. If you liked this video, check out my video about Italian Godzilla. I'm out.